18 months ago, we watched Wotan lead the gods into their magnificent new home, Valhalla. But as the Rhine maidens condemned the gods' cowardice, and Wotan's own sidekick wondered whether to destroy the whole lot of them, one thing was obvious. The ending of Wagner's Das Rheingold was just the beginning. Tonight, we pick up from that operatic cliffhanger as we look forward to curtain up on the second instalment of Wagner's Ring Cycle in a brand new production. Welcome to the Limbury Theatre here at the Royal Opera House and to this insight supported by Rolex. I'm Flora Wilson, and tonight we'll be going behind the scenes of that brand new production of the best known work and most performed one in Wagner's tetralogy, Die Walküre. Time has passed and a lot has happened in the Ring's mythic world since the end of Das Rheingold. Wotan has fathered multiple children, among them the Valkyries of the title, led by Brunhilde. Die Walküre sees the clash of wills between father and daughter and the catastrophic aftermath of two strangers who fall in love without knowing their own entangled past. It's a drama full of remarkable things, an unforgettable score, and a plot full of big, powerful personalities. So just as well, we've got two of our own to guide us through what happens. I'm joined tonight by director Barrie Kosky and conductor Antonio Pappano. Please welcome them now. Tony and Barrie, it's great to be back here with you. It seems quite a long time since we launched Das Rheingold in much the same way. Let's think briefly back to that to start with, because we haven't had a chance to hear from you about how that went. The reception of your Rheingold, Barrie, was, I think it's fair to say,
Our
it was,
Rheingold,
well,
not my Rheingold.
Your collective Rheingold then was really extremely positive. I mean, what was the experience like for you, Barrie?
It was one of the best experiences I've ever had in the opera. Over 35 years I've directed, and I've directed over 165 theatre pieces, music theatre, operetta, musicals, and spoken theatre pieces, and this was top 5. And there are a few reasons why. Firstly, because it was the beginning of a major project with the Royal Opera, and a project that I developed with Tony and with Oliver and with Peter Katana together to talk about how could we do a new ring cycle. Tony's done it here, of course, with 3 revivals. I've done it once years ago in Hanover. We both know it very well, and we thought, well, what will we like this time? So we could hand-pick the people, and we sort of knew what we were doing, I think, which is always an advantage for an audience. Well, it's not given in opera that people know what they're doing.
Let's let Tony in there.
Yeah. But I don't want to say that. And the second thing was, and so we had that experience, and it was a wonderful group of people. And secondly, of the 3 things, it was working with Tony for the first time, and the privilege and joy of going every day to discover a piece he knows backwards, but to discover it new. And Tony's openness and brilliance at bringing the score off the page through the singer's voice and then out into the space is, I think, unrivaled. Cover your ears. And the third thing was that, we tried with the production to create something that was, I think, coming from the score and coming from the text, but also maybe had something new to say, and something that hit the audience in their emotional core, which is what Wagner is doing. He is not interested in gently caressing. He's interested in stabbing into your heart whatever emotion he wants. And I think we started off, and it's great because you go, you ain't seen nothing yet. You know, it's like just the beginning.
Well, quite, and it does seem lots of critics actually was very striking, was saying they can't wait for the next bit.
Well, yeah, but also critics say things like, it's always funny, they say things, well, I don't know how they're going to do that when the next opera comes. And you go, well, that's not your job to ask that. So,
We're lining up for things to come back to, Barrie. Tony, what about you? What was your experience like of Das Rheingold?
Well, it's quite strange that, you know, the former music director is still around.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to go there next.
Doing The Ring, but and really the real reason for that was to work with Barrie. There's so many conductors have worked with Barrie, and I had never worked with Barrie, so I said, yeah, this has to be. And it's funny. We get on particularly well in the room, don't we? You know, there's a symbiosis, I think, that is quite rare, the degree to which the affinity, I mean, it has not only to do with our love for the music that we're dealing with and our care for the material, but it has to do with, you know, growing up during a time, we have so many references that we bat back and forth during the rehearsals, and things that remind us of this and the past, and that's a lovely, you know, I've got a lovely friend next to me, you know.
That is actually immediately obvious. When you arrived this afternoon, I'll tell you all a little secret. Barrie serenaded Tony on the piano. It was a magical moment. And it is immediately obvious just how well you kind of get on together. I mean, Tony, you must tell us, what is it like to be back in the building? Obviously, it's now some months have passed since you were music director here. You're now music director elsewhere in London. How does it feel to be back?
Well, you know, I left Covent Garden, and all of a sudden I'm back in a place where I have so many people who were part of you know, a bigger family. So I feel very, very, there's just a natural warmth. What is very strange is I've been given my old room back, which is very nice, but it's completely bare. It's really, I feel like I'm in a kind of a little prison, you know. It's pretty scary, and but it's my place. It's home. It just feels. I go to the canteen. I have lunch there. Nothing's changed. It's wonderful, you know. And as long as I can keep Barrie from singing, then I will have achieved.
Speaking of singing, have rehearsals started now? I think they presumably have. We're looking at a 1st of May curtain up. What are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, for 10 days. Okay. So, it's a very different process to rehearse Walküre than it is to do Rheingold. Okay. Because Rheingold is a conversation piece. It's a ping pong of different characters, and it's a chessboard, and you have to move the gods or the giants and the dwarves all around this chessboard, and you have to make sure that the dialogues are making sense. And you've got more people on the stage in Rheingold than you have any other scene in the Ring, maybe except the chorus in Götterdämmerung. But it's an unusual thing because you suddenly come back into Walküre and you've only got a handful of singers, and you've got people on stage. I mean, the Act 1 is 3 people for 1 hour, 5 minutes. And Act 2, it's 20 minutes of 2 people, then it's half an hour of 2 people with a third person coming in, and then the 5 people at the end. And this is a very different dynamic. And the piece is very different, the music's very different, the text is very different, and this is very exciting. And it's a slowly. I mean, Tony, you know, I'm present at Tony's music rehearsal, so I can listen to what Tony is saying to the singers and try and feed back the way Tony feeds back into my rehearsals. And I think what the singers enjoy, just one thing picking up on what Tony was saying, it is, in my experience, unusual, and it helps the singers enormously when mum and dad get on. Because most rehearsals, I'm mum.
I was saying, which one's
No, I'm mum. There's no doubt.
I wasn't going to touch that one.
In a lot of opera houses, and particularly at the level of Royal Opera, Dad is not around for most of the rehearsals because Dad's off conducting orchestras on tour or something, and therefore it's a very different thing. And then when in a lot of rehearsals there's either tension. And you can see that the singers, you go stop, and the singers then have to choose: do I look at Mum? Do I look at Dad? Who do I take the advice from? Who's in? And with Tony and I, they feel free because they know that there's no fighting here and there's no squabbling, and actually we're there to draw the best out of them. So this last 10 days has just been slowly to go into the world of Walküre, and it does help that Tony knows it backwards, that I know it well from the time I've done it before. And even though it's very different from what Tony did last time, they're different singers, he's a different artist, and I'm doing a completely different version from Hanover. But it's just wonderful to be in an opera room. Like today, for example, poor Chris Maltman was going through his Act 2 monologue, Wotan. Yeah. And this is as I said to the cast on the opening day of rehearsals, this is what Wagner said was the key scene in the whole of The Ring. He said it's the most important scene. He used that word, wichtig, the most important scene in the entire Ring.
The monologue. The
monologue of Wotan. Because it's the whole, it's the changing of the story where he tells Brunhilde, I'm going to have to destroy Siegmund. I'm going to have to kill Siegmund. And then, in the midst of all that, he reels out one of the most despairing, nihilistic, hopeless, bitter, tortured pages of music in Western music. And that's as simple as that. And it's the moment when the audience go, you're not an asshole, you're actually a tragic figure. It's the absolute turning point when you go, oh, right, there's a depth here, there's an experience that's being lived, it's there in the music and whatever. So for poor Wotan's doing a new production, a role debut, with him on one side and me on the other, and it's stopping every second, it's this bar, it's this word. Tony wants a flavour on that verb. He wants a piano and a sforzando there. I want him to turn on that. And it's fabulous. Because you're nearly 6 hours on 25 minutes of music, and we just did the architecture today. And Chris left exhausted.
Tony, have you been in touch a lot since curtain down on Rheingold, as it were? Has there been kind of communication in the interim as you're preparing for this, or is that?
No, not really. I saw a video of your presentation, and then I witnessed the presentation on the first day. I don't want to waste I don't want to be too much ahead of the game. There's a feel, and this is quite scary actually in the process, is to let it unfold. And if you've crossed the I's, if you've crossed the T's and dotted all the I's before you even start, I grew up as a coach, as a pianist, so I'm training singers and, cross that T and dot that I and do that. So I do that anyway in coaching the singers. But the discovery of how the architecture, how this thing is going to develop, I think you have to have the courage to let it evolve. I'm not shirking my responsibilities. It's partly because I can have the luxury of doing that now that I know the piece very, very well. But you're constantly having to reread the translation of the text and just remind yourself what exactly they're saying. Because I tell you, when you get, it's like getting caught with your pants down if you don't really know what they're saying. That's dishonest.
I wonder, of all four of the Ring cycle operas, music dramas, this is perhaps the best known. It certainly has some of the best known music. We'll come to that later, of course. But does that make it harder to prepare almost? Or does it make it easier as a proposition to stage standalone?
It's something that's very interesting. This is the so-called, because of the Bayreuth tradition that after the first season, Walküre gets one rehearsal less than all the other ring pieces. That, oh yeah, Walküre, you know.
It runs.
It goes.
Wow.
You know, and I think that's not fair. That said, it is the piece that is most often heard individually. It's rarely that you hear, you know, Siegfried that's not part of a cycle. It's rare. But Valkyrie, yes. I think its positioning in the ring is very interesting, that it comes just after a conversational piece that is, Rheingold is in some ways hard to love, because it's not an opera where you get the, you know, the melodic fulfillment here and there. But in Die Walküre, you get a lot of it, and a depth and a playing with silence, and his greater mastery of all the themes, the leitmotifs, the musical visiting cards, as I call them.
I wonder, do you both remember your first encounters with this opera? I have to confess, I'm pretty sure mine was actually via Apocalypse Now, which may be true of some others in this room as well. Sort of rather low-level way of encountering it. But Barrie, when did you first hear or see it?
Concert in the Melbourne Concert Hall with Rita Hunter and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. Oh.
What a place to start.
In the 80s in Australia. And I think, was it probably Alfred Remedios was there too, singing Siegmund. And I can't remember who else was singing, but it was in Melbourne in concert. But I came through Wagner through Tristan, that was the first one, and Rheingold. So I had this weird thing where I heard Tristan and then went, oh, Richard Wagner, that's interesting. And then I went to Rheingold, and then I heard Walküre in concert. And I mean, it's interesting because it's, as Tony said, it's where Wagner goes, okay, I was just warming up in the Rheingold. And Tony's absolutely right. Rheingold is in a way, you know, it's for director, it's probably the easiest piece, even though it's nutty, because you've just got these conversations and you don't have to deal with it as you do in Rheingold and Walküre and Siegfried with an hour of just three people. And if you don't have the skills to put that on stage, it's a catastrophe, because then you have the singers just standing there in a sort of slightly moved concert version with lights and costumes, or in the case of a lot of productions, you bury the thing in conceptual ideas that just suffocate the thing. So concepts are meaningless if they're not related to what the people are doing on stage. And concepts are meaningless if you can't motivate the individual singer on the stage into what they're doing. And you don't want people to remember the concept. You want people to be involved in the story and the characters. And there can be, of course, there's concept there, but it's the curse of the German opera world that's been with us for 80 years, and I work in it and live in it, where you start with concept. And I always think, no, you start with ideas and possibilities, and then the concept emerges. The concept is the opening night, not what you've done 2 years before.
Okay. That's a remarkable, detailed answer to the question I asked.
I forgot what your question was, sorry.
It was actually when you first came across this opera. Tony, very quickly, what was your
Rita
first
Hunter,
experience?
Melbourne, 80s.
Yeah.
What was your first experience of Die Walküre, Tony? Do you remember?
Yes, playing rehearsals
Okay.
of it that would have been in Frankfurt, yeah.
So you came at it from the inside,
Yeah,
right from the beginning.
yeah.
Okay, let's talk more about how it compares to Das Rheingold. Obviously, it's a much bigger piece in terms of length. Barrie, you've already explained some of the ways in which actually, in a different way, it's a rather smaller scale in terms of sort of personnel. What else matters comparison-wise as far as you're concerned? I mean, Tony, how does it compare in the most general sense,
Yeah,
musically?
it's certainly more symphonic, And yet at the same time, it's more chamber music-like. It's very weird. The bigger moments are considerably more big-boned, and the intimate moments are of a rare refinement and beauty. The writing for the woodwinds, it's not a skittish piece, which Rheingold is on purpose. This has many stretches of what I would call elegiac mood, tinged with enormous sadness and nostalgia, but sadness. I mean, and ultimately tragedy. Yeah. So it has a greater weight, whereas one's approach to Rheingold should be and can be more Mendelssohnian. You know, that tradition, Mendelssohn, Weber, those composers that came before Wagner that certainly influenced him, and that kind of fingerspitz, right on the tip of your fingers, that kind of, and fast moving, and this is different. Yeah. And for the director, it's huge. The reason the piece is so challenging, Barrie alluded to it before, is what do you do with a stretch of music that is like, all of a sudden people have been singing, and then there are 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes of music that he's got to fill, and that is quite slow, that I've got to keep dramatically interesting as well as his job, and that is really, really challenging. It's beautiful, but beauty, beauty in theater is a very dangerous element. There can be too much beauty. And so you have to know, and only through experience do you learn how to dose out the beauty and keeping the tension through the long notes. A long note, I mean, technically speaking, a long note can sit or park, or a long note can travel. If it's a wind instrument, it's the breath that makes it go to the next note, and on a violin, on a stringed instrument, it's the bow and the tension of the bow that keeps the sound alive as you go forward. Now, in a nutshell, over 1 billion examples in an opera like a Wagner opera, that process is happening. And at any tempo, you have to know how to keep those longer notes alive.
Presumably, that also works on the macro scale, that push and pull of structural contribution that this work is making to the ring cycle.
Well, not just the ring cycle, but within the evening. I mean, if that's where Tony was talking about symphonic. I mean, you cannot conduct any Wagner or any opera really, but you cannot conduct these pieces with going from that moment to the next moment to the next. Tony works on an arc or a wave of different things, knowing that he's got to end up in 15 minutes there, and also knowing he's got another 4 hours that he's got, and he's aiming for the upsheed. That's where we're aiming. We're aiming the farewell is where we're aiming. Now, any conductor or director always has that in mind, but with any production, but with Wagner, it is crucial, and that only comes through experiences, which is why conductors go back to these pieces again and again and again, and why it's just an absolute priceless experience to have Tony there going, careful of this moment, because I know if we don't, we've got a problem here in 10 minutes' time. Yeah. And you can only do that through experience. And with Walküre, as Tony said, the problem is Wagner says he has 2 pages. Let's talk about the example that we haven't quite solved yet in Act 1, because we haven't solved everything. Well, we haven't solved anything yet, but really. But there's this incredible moment where Hunding and Siegmund and Sieglinde, Hunding's come home, he's discovered Siegmund in the house. Siegmund has done this amazing monologue saying who he is. Hunding has realized he's the enemy and says, you're going to fight tomorrow, I'm going to kill you. But hospitality means, in the traditional sense, I must give you shelter for the night, but tomorrow I'm going to kill you. And he's just abused his wife, and there's 2 pages of music, elegiac, sehnsuchtige, a yearning in the music, that you have to fill between three people. And you can't just fill it with banality, and you can't fill it with meaningful looks. Because if there's too many meaningful looks, you know, you're going to run out of, it's going to die. And so this is the most, this 2 pages for me at the moment is my nightmare, because I haven't quite solved it yet, and I want it to be fantastic, and it's not there yet. But that's the excitement about going into it, you know?
You've already given us some sense of how the characters in this piece relate to each other. There's one, and only one, really vital character carried over from Das Rheingold. Wotan, of course, is still there in this opera, very much still there. But a lot of new faces.
Fricka.
There is Fricka, she gets her moment, it's true. Then there are a lot of new faces, and one, Brunhilde, is going to be vital for what comes next throughout the cycle. I just wonder, can we introduce her very quickly for those in the room who haven't seen this before? Who is Brunhilde, and why should we care?
Well, she is the greatest female character in Wagner. Maybe even more, well, I'm not saying great, probably with Isolde, the most complicated. Oh, Kundry's pretty complicated too, but she's the one we love. Isolde, it's so cosmic, you don't really, she ends up sort of being water, Isolde, anyway. She becomes nature or something at the end of the opera. We lose her psychology. That's what Wagner wanted. But with Brunhilde, he created a character which was unparalleled, by Wotan, in music theatre. There's no character like Brunhilde. There's certain characters in the German tradition before Wagner where you think, okay, he's hinging. But Wagner has gone down to the depths of earth to basically have an affair with Erde. He's basically slept with Mother Earth with the idea that he's going to produce these sort of super children, these super women, whose sole function is to obey him, to follow his will, and secondly, whose sole purpose is to gather the dead bodies of fallen heroes, collect them, collect the bodies, literally, and bring them into Valhalla, where eventually they will be woken up at some great sort of quasi-messianic moment and give Wotan even more power and control. And that's their function. And they don't question him. And along comes, and he's her most favorite child. I mean, remember, Wotan is based on Jupiter and Zeus. And in Greek and Roman mythology, Jupiter and Zeus have fathered all sorts of children all over the earth with all of their affairs. So there's hundreds of children. But of all the hundreds of children, for him, Brunhilde is the special one because she adores him, she obeys him, she understands him. They talk about, you understand, you feel me, you are my will, you are me. She says, I am you. Yeah. I am you, she says. And he says to her, you're created to just obey me. And what we see, the genius of Wagner, is a 16-year-old teenager in Walküre. That's how she behaves at the beginning. Having the most extraordinary traumatic life experience over Act 2 and 3, understanding and being horrified by what her father has done, put to sleep, and in Act 3 wakes up as a woman. And then in Götterdämmerung, a mortal woman. She is kissed, her godhead is kissed at the end, away at the end of Valkyrie. But we see in Götterdämmerung, the Brunhilde of Götterdämmerung is nowhere near the Brunhilde of Act 2. When she comes on in Act 2, this is a 16-year-old schoolgirl. This is not anyone who believes they're going to save the world and has no idea what's going to happen.
And she's boisterous, and she's like a tomboy.
Yeah, and it's not it's not this. It's like, I mean, much as I love Birgit Nilsson and Kirsten Flagstaff, they had two of the greatest voices of the 20th century, and they're all amazing artists. But that's not the voice of a 16-year-old. And I think that we're very lucky because we have a role debut, Elizabeth Strid, who I think a lot of people heard in the revival of Flying Dutchman last season. Doing her first Brunhilde. She's sung Sieglindes for 15 years now around the world. and she's doing, and as Elizabeth looks 16 when she comes on stage, but sings with the voice of a Wagner opera singer. And it's very exciting because you go, oh, wow, who's this? And it's the only time we see, in the first few minutes of the second act of Walküre, it's the only time we see Wotan genuinely happy. Because he's saying, come on, baby, let's rock and roll. And she's going, yeah. And then his wife arrives. And then... So, you know, that's what we experience there. And Brunhilde becomes this extraordinary, and we get to know her over the 3 operas. And then what she does and what she experiences in Götterdämmerung, I mean, she is the absolute, she has the whole show on her shoulders in Götterdämmerung. So Walküre is just a warm-up, but she is the most sympathetic character in all of Wagner opera, in my opinion.
Let's talk about themes. I think it's time to, I mean, you've already pulled us deep into Die Walküre, Barrie, but let's talk about the themes of this opera. I mean, what is it actually about as far as you're concerned?
Family. Family, on one, but that's the first thing. I think it's about, I think I talked about this in Rheingold. Wagner's favorite theater piece was the Agamemnon, the first play of Aeschylus's Oresteia. He said, this is the most perfect work of art. And he basically plundered the Agamemnon from Oresteia and then plundered other things and basically came up with his version of the House of Atreus, which is Wotan's family. And so we see, this is an incredible collision between husbands and wives, between fathers and daughters, between brothers and sisters, between husbands, two sets of husbands and wives, and between children and their parents. This is one of the reasons why the opera is successful. Tony talked about the genius music, but we all love a family drama, and that's what we get in Walküre. You know, Siegfried is yet to be, you know, created, you know, so we are dealing with a family drama, and this timeless, I mean, you sit in Walküre and you go, oh God, yeah, I get that. And it's Wagner's understanding of the human condition to distill in these godlike characters or human characters like Siegmund and Sieglinde, the brother and sister pair, human emotions and human questions that we have. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing after family is that it's this megalomaniacal's man. We get to see his insides. So what was just a facade in Rheingold, he's opening himself up. I mean, we're getting to see muscle, blood, bone, nerve ends. That's in the music, that's in the text. So we're watching an extraordinary character portrayal of the downfall of a man who made a mighty big mistake. And we love watching that in the theatre. That goes back to the Greeks. It goes back to Shakespeare. This is the definition of tragedy, you know, of the thing. And then I think the last thing is love, because that's actually, in the end, what Wagner is getting at. So we see different sorts of love, of course. And we don't just see happy love. We see regretful love. And we see, in the case of Fricka, we see wounded love. And so Wagner is presenting to us this amazing smorgasbord of love. Ooh, just came out of my mouth there, it's quite good. Smorgasbord of love, where there are many different sorts of love. And I think for me, I don't know what Tony thinks of what he's for, those three are the most important things for me.
Tony, talk us through how this works musically. Wagner set in motion a load of those leitmotifs you mentioned, those motifs that are the kind of fabric of this score. He's already set some of those in motion in Das Rheingold. Do we hear those again in this piece, any of them?
Oh, sure. The opening of this opera is fantastic because there's a storm scene, and Siegmund is being chased, and you can hear the breathlessness of it. You can hear the rain. You can hear, and then we hear, well, what the music associated with Donner, which is ta-dum, 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 which we hear at the very end of Rheingold. So the proximity to that, I mean, it's all, I mean, if you're seeing the cycle, it's all very related. But the means are very, very simple. It's for something that sounds so theatrical and complicated, basically is one note repeated. Listen, this is the strings, but he uses dynamics. He goes, and against that you hear this. And what is that? It's a scale. It's actually very basic, but you put that together with this. And it's so arresting. I mean, on the piano, it's not so arresting, but with the orchestra, it just takes your breath away, and you're introduced to the theme. Well, you're introduced to these like I would say like screams. This tight interval, blaring horns, and what I spoke about before. Now, that is the intervals between the notes. Ta-dum, 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 and that's the God Donner. But the difference between that and themes that are built on scales, the music of Siegmund, who comes in and he's world weary, this again, another scale, listen. Then we get if we turn it backwards, it's a ring. Another guy's is, if you listen to the bass, and you get that distortion, but it's just a scale. So using basic elements, this is Beethoven, of course. This is using morsel, just simple notes, and this downward trajectory with a crescendo. Usually a downward trajectory would imply a diminuendo. No, with a crescendo. And you get this very human suffering. Another scale. Look, listen to what happens here. The music that is associated with Sieglinde and her pity for this man, this wounded man who appears in the house, is this. And this is related to the ring theme, but it's again, so now you have the two themes. This is Siegmund in the bass. You hear? The two, this intertwining is so much more complex in Walküre. Now listen to this. One of the most beautiful phrases. As we feel the empathy between the two characters, unbeknownst to them yet. It's early, we're just a few pages in. But listen, they're just scales. A transformation of that suffering music becomes hopeful. The pity music. Another scale. Another one. Another one. then one of the major love themes here, so full of yearning, but so sad at the same time. Yeah, I hope I kept you interested through the long notes there, but that's that. But But so simple means to create enormous expression and emotion.
I was also thinking as you were talking, Tony, there's something so striking about all these scales, that scalic movement in this opera.
Yeah.
Thinking back to the opening of Rheingold and all those arpeggios.
Yes.
More nature music.
Exactly.
And I wonder...
And this comes from Beethoven, the
Exactly.
Eroica, da da dee, ra da da dee dee, which implies a certain heroism. You know, the piece was Eroica Symphony was written originally as an homage dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte, but so that and Strauss would go on to use that arpeggio, but that comes from Wagner.
Yeah.
We'll use arpeggios to create archetypes.
Yeah.
This is much more human.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting thinking of these as kind of music's natural resources, though, as well. And I wonder, I mean, Barrie, nature seemed to play a very important role in Rheingold for you. Do you think, is that also important in Walküre? Thinking of that storm?
No, it's important in the whole ring cycle. And not just because we did what we did with Erde, where we presented her.
Is he on?
Am I on? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just what we did with Erde and Rheingold when we presented her in the way we did, where she was an actor also playing. We only heard Erde singing. But nature is crucial because it's not just the landscape on which the drama happens, it is the drama. You know, I mean, whether it's the world ash tree that, you know, that Wotan at the very, very beginning of the whole story destroyed, or whether it's the Rhine, where the Rheingold comes, but whether it's a storm at the beginning of Walküre, which actually is summoned up by Wotan. He is, because he's driving Siegmund into that house, where he has stuck that sword in a tree, which is also an echo of that world ash tree. And then you get, of course, this amazing moment at the end where fire comes back, where he calls on Loge. And remember, Rheingold finished with Loge saying, "I'm out of here, this is a disaster. I'm not going anywhere near these gods. I'm disappearing like fire does." But Wotan calls on him again. And we didn't get Sean Paniker to come back and make an appearance, to come on stage at the end of Act 3 of Walküre without singing, but he calls on fire, and fire is what then surrounds Brunhilde. And these are not just scenic elements. These are crucial elements, and ultimately Wagner was a sort of someone who understood that without a relationship with nature and without an understanding of our nature is nature and nature is our nature, we're doomed. And we've got to remember also, at the end of Götterdämmerung, the world isn't destroyed. The gods' world is destroyed. Mm-hmm. The gods are destroyed, and human beings must create the next chapter. So it's not apocalyptic, the end of Götterdämmerung. You have to always remember that, because a lot of the people think, oh, you know, Brunhilde throws herself into the fire and the world explodes. That's actually not what happens. Mm-hmm. And I think that the nature is, and that was for me very crucial, that, you know, we found we had to find a link between all of these 4 operas, and for me that link was Mother Nature, who is so pivotal to the story. Who is like a Cassandra. She comes on and she warns. She says, watch out, you know, and Wotan knows that when she talks, as he says in this monologue now, she said it. She was right. And he has to be careful. And to create this character that the audience can then, as they will see over the next 3 operas, can be emotionally connected to. Because Earth, if you say nature, what's that on stage? Okay, that can be a tree, but you're not going to be emotionally. The tree can look beautiful, but the tree's dead. It's inanimate. It's there. It's a piece of scenery. And you say fire. Fire can be spectacular, and we do have a spectacular fire trick up our sleeves at the end of Act 3. Not saying anything more about that, but it's hopefully going to be extraordinary. But that's just there. But to actually sort of personify nature like Wagner does. But he only gives us 2 moments where she's on stage, and I think that's not enough. So that's one of the reasons why I brought her in. And of course, because there's so much of the opera about dreaming. You know, Wagner was obsessed. I mean, this is pre-Freud, pre-Jung. He was obsessed with the idea of sleep and dreams, of waking and sleeping, of dreaming. And in his operas, every single one of the operas, maybe with the exception of Rienzi, but we never count that one anyway, and certainly not Liebesverbot. But it's all about dreams, and characters are referring always to I awake, I am awakened, I sleep, your vision, your dream. And then you end up thinking, whose dream is this? Is Lohengrin Elsa's dream or Lohengrin's dream? Is in Tristan and Isolde, who's dreaming? Is it Isolde's dream? She starts it. Is she dreaming Tristan? Or is Tristan dreaming at the beginning of Act 3 in retrospect? And in The Ring, you are constantly confronted with whose dream are we experiencing? And this to me is life. This is how we live. Whose dreams are we dreaming when we exist?
Okay, this brings us to the big question of power, surely, and Wotan's absolute power mania. I wonder specifically, what does Wagner tell us musically, Tony, about the relationship between Wotan and Brunhilde? What do we know simply by listening in this opera?
Well, just when we first meet them in this opera, this cavalcade, this you know, dun 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 dun, but in such a joyous, not Apocalypse Now atmosphere, just a father-daughter, and you know, leaping and laughing, and you know, it makes you feel good to see that on stage, and to see the 2 characters, Elizabeth and Chris, who are playing Wotan and Brunhilde, just enjoying that, because it's not supposed to be in Wagner that this, but here, you know, there's a liberation, and you know, right at the beginning, after such a complicated, psychologically speaking, first act, this is so simple. It's so bereft of any kind of, you know, whatever, you know, so this is pre-Freud and pre-Jung, but or any kind of psychological mumbo-jumbo. It's just father and daughter, you know, it's gorgeous. And not even the Verdi father and daughter. It's something even more primal than that.
How does that change then, through this opera, through this score?
Well, when you, I think it's, I mean, you talked a lot about the monologue, where Wagner uses Wotan as a vessel in some respects to remind us of all that's happened before. That annoys a lot of people because it's quite, it stretches, you know, the time factor. But it's also a moment where this revealing, this absolutely just ripping your chest open and you know, and airing the really all the laundry that, you know, the terrible things.
Yeah, he confesses to his daughter.
That he confesses to his daughter.
All of that poison.
How does a young girl listen to that? You know, that, and she sings very little in the monologue. She has a few interjections here and there, tries to prop him up as he becomes more and more desperate and despairing. And, you know, in fact, arguing, you know, he says, I don't want you defending Siegmund in the fight against Hunding. You will you will do what Fricka says and you will let Siegmund die. And she says, no, I'm not going to do it. And he gets incredibly angry. And the music is of a rare violence. I mean, it's da-dum, dum, da-dum, dum, 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 you know, so the dynamic between them changes considerably.
And then by the start of Act 3, then we do get the kind of the martial take on that Valkyrie music, that most famous of all operatic passages.
And you know what's interesting about that is I don't remember how you're going to stage that from what you said in the I don't. So that's all going to be new to me. But there is an element. There's a savagery about it, but it is also fun. It's fun. It's fun to conduct, and the rivalry between the girls and they're warriors basically.
It's a very weird scene. I mean, we're used to. I mean, in popular culture, Francis Ford Coppola had this genius idea with the helicopters in Vietnam in Apocalypse Now, which is very hard to get out of everyone's, you know, because we see those. I mean, it's genius, cinematic genius, but of course. You're confronted with this very weird and contradictory thing. So now what was a joyous thing in Act 2 when we met Brunhilde and Wotan has suddenly become much bigger and whatever, and has something sort of bacchanalian to it. Yeah. It's like Offenbach has written the music for a production of the Bacchae. Because they're bacchanten. That's what, I mean, he's bringing two things. The Furies of Greek mythology, the people that chased Orest and to the island. And then we have the Bacchanten who ripped Orpheus to shreds and who were children of Dionysus. And he's going, I'm going to put that in, so it's Dionysius, it's the Furies, and we're going to put it in the cocktail mix, but I'm going to slightly give it an Offenbach, because I always think it sounds like the can-can gone wrong. But here's the problem. They're collecting dead bodies. And they're going, hoya, hoya, hoya. And how can you present that on stage that is believable and not just 15 minutes of silly fun, because then we're really messing up the opera. But at the same time, you know, they're laughing, ha, 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 ha. Yeah. You know, it's written, it's composed, laughing, which is sort of written in this weirdly operetta style, but you can't play the operetta. So how the hell do you stage it?
Well, that was going to be my next question, really, to be honest. I mean, you know, if you're not thinking of Coppola's helicopters, you're surely thinking of all those 19th century photos of women with the horned helmets.
Well, you can't do that. You can't. You have to go direction. You have to go to Dionysus. Dionysus, being the theatre god, has all our answers. He's the only god I ever pray to, and he looks after alcohol and theatre, and he is. You have to go Dionysian, and that is where the destructive energy and the creative energy exist together. That's what Dionysius was. He was on one side a seducer and on the other side a destroyer. So you have to then, I think, honor the Dionysian, and that is it's a sort of post-bloodbath collection of bodies. And in our production, they're collecting dead bodies. I mean, you have to do that. That's their job. And I don't like abstracted Walküres where you think, what are they doing? And there's no horses in our production, either real or pantomime. And that. So I would say the key is the Dionysian, where joy and esprit can coexist with destruction and death.
And does Brunhilde get to share in that, do you think? I mean, she is a Valkyrie, or is she too much her own?
She's like gold medal dead collector. You know, she collects more dead bodies than anyone. She's the gold medal winner, you know. She has all the trophies at home. You know, I collected 500 that day and 2,000 that day, and you know, she is the. And I'm being flippant, but but it's interesting in how Wagner does it. We don't see her doing that.
Because she's taking care of...
Because she's taking care of what she shouldn't be taking care of. Sieglinde. And so when she comes in with Sieglinde, and then the work is finished. Then the drama takes over.
Okay, let's talk just a little more about your new production that we're going to be seeing from the 1st of May, Barrie. I mean, how much have you kept the visual language and your approach kind of consistent with Rheingold? I guess with the ring, there's always that question of how much you're starting from the ground of each individual work and how much is part of this overview.
Yeah.
How do you do
Well,
that?
I mean, I'm sure there were people thinking, oh, it's going to be 16 hours in front of that big dead tree. I'm sure it's not going to be 16 hours in front of that dead tree. But it's we presented a burnt tree because we said that Erda was remembering at the end of a burnt world that has been destroyed, and if the climate scientists are right, that's actually what's going to happen. It's going to be, we're going to just set the forests are going to burn, and then the water will eventually, I mean, Wagner was basically writing what's going to happen to us in whatever 100 years or whatever, where the forests and the bushfires will destroy because it'll be too hot. And the water will rise and the water will flood, and that's what Wagner writes at the end of The Ring. But I wanted to start with this idea of because I'm Australian, so I was brought up with bushfires and that sort of that, and the starting was to those trees. I mean, that's how we got to the tree in Rheingold. It was from the Victorian countryside outside Melbourne, which is very bushfire prone, where you see these beautiful old trees that are just with just ash around, and they're like human carcasses. They're just like these amazingly sort of fragile sort of images of sort of skeletal landscape, and that was the starting point for me. But for example, I'll give you a little hint. In the first act, we're in domestic space. We weren't in domestic spaces in Rheingold. No. We are in Hunding and Sieglinde's house. You can't get around that. They live there. They eat there, they sleep there, there's food. We are in a very domestic world. You can't escape that. It's great because suddenly we've gone from the cosmic end of Rheingold, where we've presented nature bowing down to Wotan, bowing down. The thunder and the lightning and the rainbow are bowing down to worship the god. And he's brought them in his control. Here, it's like going from this sort of cosmic end of Rheingold into an Ibsen or Strindberg play. It's doors, and it's you need to have a table and people eat, and there's cups and there's drinking, and it's all written in the score, which is fantastic because you go zhunk down like this. But so we've got a very, very, because I like austere spaces where the performers can create. It's a huge burnt wall made out of the same material as the tree was. So it may give audiences an idea of how we may be going, but it's an enormous wall with 2 doors in it, but it's the same burnt wood. So Erda's having another dream here. But then, of course, we introduce modern elements, and for me it's very important that the audience sit through Rheingold and don't know what Walküre is going to look like, and it's the same thing. You'll have no idea where we go into Siegfried, because Siegfried is a fairy story. And you have to play on that weird, it's Brothers Grimm meets David Lynch, that's what Siegfried is. Götterdämmerung is completely different, it's a thing like that. But you have to, I always think directors and designers have to understand, and I learned this in my ill-fated Hanover production, that over 16 hours, you must give the audience visually what the music's doing, which is changing. And there's nothing worse for an audience if the curtain goes up on a scenic thing that they've seen before for an hour, and that you can feel the disappointment in it going, oh. And it can still be very simple, but I think with what Wagner gives us is the possibilities to do that. So we have certain, like Wagner's music, there are leitmotifs that we'll go through, but there are new elements here. We are in the 21st century here. We play the people very contemporary. I'm sorry if you're going to be disappointed. You think you're suddenly going to get hats and helmets and little tunics with sheepskin. You're going to be disappointed, but I think that's obvious. But we have to create identifiable characters here, and so it's very important that we meet these people. And as we said, that we know Rheingold was giants and dwarves, and there's no humans. And here we're in a world which is us. So we have to relate to that. What was your question again? Sorry for that.
It's all right. You've more than answered this one, Barrie. Thank you. Tony, with the score, I mean, this is a huge score. Is there in it, do you think, is there a passage or a scene which is kind of key to you making musical sense of the whole? Is there a place you have to go to start?
For me, because it's such a catalyst for the downfall of Wotan, is the scene with his wife. I don't know. I keep getting drawn back into that scene and how cleverly she plays it. She's been deeply offended that Wotan, I mean, they're his children, right? You know, so she's not pleased about that. You know, and
she's childless too.
And she's childless. That, you know, that he's let Sieglinde and Siegmund find each other again, and they, for all intents and purposes, initiate an incestuous relationship. I mean, they don't really know that this is what it is, but it is that, and that's it was shocking also to many of the first critics and audiences that saw this piece, that, you know, that you take incest as one, you know, but it speaks to the bigger question of of love, and to what degree, you know, how big is love? You know, it has different aspects to it, and Wagner's saying it's all love. You know, whether it's between brother and sister, or father and daughter, it's all, that love is something that's so great. But that scene where she basically destroys Wotan can in many ways be seen as domestic, but actually it is working on such a highly refined plane, because everything that is being said is iconic. Everything that is being said is relatable. That's what's scary about it, you know. And she knows how to use her femininity, her fragility, her hurt, you know, against him.
Yeah, and it's just this wonderful moment at the end of that scene where you feel she just goes, checkmate. She says, give me the eye, swear it. And she goes, the eye, and there's this amazing music which suddenly just comes out, and you just go, she's just moved that chess piece and gone there, like that. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll play it for you, that's important.
You know the bit I mean?
No, I don't. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. He says, okay, I swear that I will obey your commands. And it ends on this very low note. Here it comes. Here. She's got him. You know. It's a victory.
It reminds me of what George Bernard Shaw said about this opera, that he thought there was not a note in it that wasn't to kind of sharpen the point of the drama. And I don't know whether, is that what you're... Yeah, that's exactly what he said.
I agree 100%. If there's not one moment where you go, I don't understand. I mean, we can talk about, we're trying to work out the text of things, but it's not one moment where it's so clear what he's trying to, how he's trying to unravel this, you know, and it's just endless onion skins. It's this never-ending unraveling of emotion, which when you realize it is actually contained you know, the poison of the ring is staining everything. We're talking about that today. That you get this feeling that even, so he creates these beautiful moments of lyric love and yearning, and he'll do it for 3 bars, and then there'll always be a shadow or a stain. The poison of the curse of Albrecht, the poison of what Wotan has done, is keeps seeping into this opera, and people are resisting it, and then the music resists us, but it keeps going back. You know, it's quite astonishing when you listen to it for 6 hours a day, how when you are confronted with utter genius. I mean, that's what you're just confronted. You become very small, and this is from someone who has enormous problems with the character of Richard Wagner. But I forgive him. After 6 hours of being in a rehearsal room, I forgive him for all his appalling attitudes and opinions and the way he treated people. You forgive him because he wrote that, you know.
Speaking of that, Tony, I mean, it's a marathon feat to conduct this. Rehearsing it is clearly also a marathon in its own way, but how do you pace yourself? How do you help the singers to pace themselves and the musicians in the pit through such a big play and sing?
Well, what happens is as you get to know the piece better and better and better, and you keep coming back to it. I don't think there's a conductor in the world who conducts this music that doesn't have some unfinished business with the ring. That's why you keep it's there, and you keep being attracted by it. What happens is you learn the sections, you learn where the building blocks from which this thing is made. Your capacity to recognize them allows you to see the even bigger blocks. So you don't think in oh yeah, those 10 pages, but you think, at some point you're able to, when you start a section, you can, yeah, it's going over there. It's very easily intellectually to, you can see that if you're just any kind of musician and, with any kind of training, you can see that even when you read it for the first time. Oh yeah, you said that's the structure of this area. But when you're in it, there are traps everywhere because we're human beings. We have feelings, we have passion, we have sensitivity and vulnerability. And if you're musical on top of it, you want to love that phrase, and you want to love this phrase, and you want to squeeze all the juice out of that phrase. And then you start losing the coherence. Mm-hmm. And this is what every day we work on to try to square that circle, is to get the juice out of every word without losing the direction and these big blocks. And so when you're able to, when you have digested where these big blocks are and how they work, and all of a sudden it takes a huge weight off you because you have a certain a confidence and knowledge that the thing is just bringing you along. And of course at this point, since I've conducted the piece several times, it's I wouldn't say it's become second nature, but something akin to that, and that's a nice feeling. I mean, Christ, I've dedicated 30 years of my life to this thing,
Yeah, Barrie, what about you? I mean, Walküre, the magic fire, for instance, has caused technical headaches to directors basically since Wagner first wrote this piece. What are the challenges for you, though, of staging it today?
I think all of what Tony said applies to also the mise en scène and how you create that, how to create that tension, how you, as I said, there's these second act is these 3 amazing confrontations between Wotan and Fricka, then Wotan and Brunhilde, and then Brunhilde and Siegmund for the Todesverkündigung, when she comes to say, you have to die. You're going to die. You've looked me in the eyes. You will die. And then she changes her mind. But these three things. Now, what he does is, of course, he has these 2 characters on stage, and a lot of the time, the other character, like in Greek tragedy, where you have to wait till someone has gone through quite a lot of information, and you're doing a lot of reacting acting. So the challenge for a director on a very banal level is how to keep the person who's not singing involved in the drama without turning into a rabbit in the spotlights and the headlights going like this, or just constantly being in a state of, I'm listening, I'm listening, I'm listening. So how do you make that happen? That's the first big challenge. The second, I think the big challenge is how do you then unfold the drama and the pivotal relation, which is Wotan Brunhilde in this piece, to the moment at the end of the opera where Wagner says, you know, to the world, you ain't seen nothing, you have never heard anything like this, because there is nothing in music theatre before Walküre to compare to the farewell that Wotan sings to his daughter. And I'm not just saying, oh, it's a beautiful piece of music. The complexity of that moment, where he firstly kisses away, he forgives her by just taking away her mortality. I mean, it's extraordinary to think about that. I will, in an act of forgiveness, kiss your mortality, your immortality away, and then I won't let you just wander the world, I'll put you to sleep. And all of those mythological ideas of kiss, of sleep, of the ring of fire, all those things come into play with the most heartbreaking music. And you think, on one level, you think, yeah, but you did this to her. We're here because of you, Wotan. And yet you're seduced at the same time by his gorgeous music and the farewell and the music, and you end up going like this, and you forget for a moment what Wotan has done. And that's genius, because that's seduction. And Wagner was the great seducer. You know, the music is a drug. He's drugging us. And we're accepting that drug freely. It's sort of fabulous, but we're accepting it. And I think for a director, that is a challenge. Now, on a very purely banal level, yes, the audience are expecting some fire of some sort. Yeah, they are. And we know from previous productions, our poor friend and colleague Richard had the worst nightmare of any director ever to get to the premiere of a Walküre production at the English National Opera a few years ago. And it was, I think you know the story, and we're told by the council, you can't use fire in this production because you're going to burn the Colosseum down the day before the premiere. I mean, it's a director's nightmare. And Richard, of course, was devastated. Now that, I mean, that's not going to happen because we've done our
due diligence.
Due diligence. And I don't want to burn the Royal Opera House down. But there is an expectation. Now, usually as a director, I'm going, well, I'm not going to give the audience what they want, you know. But when it comes to a scene where he says, you are now asleep, he calls on Loga, the fire. If you don't do something that's pretty special, that's going to complement the music, you can't compete with the music. You can't there. But you've got to give something which can make the audience go, like this. Then the show doesn't work. It doesn't work. So for a year and a half, the incredible technical department of the Royal Opera House have been working on bringing my idea to fruition. And it's a very simple idea. I'm not going to say what it is. It's very, very simple, but hopefully be very beautiful, because it needs to be strange and beautiful and haunting and sensuous and weird and wonderful. And it can't look technical. The problem with fire on the stage is you need those wretched pipes, and because the gas has to come out of somewhere, and then it all looks like a barbecue. And you have to find a way where it's not a barbecue and she's not shashlik on the barbecue. And so this is the challenge. So you have to find a way, and unfortunately sometimes physics creates problems for us. And that's why you need to work for a year and a half on a way to try and not make that happen. But we've all seen productions with fire where we go, no, come on, you know.
Well, I think it's fair to say we'll all be rooting for you on the fire
Yes.
front. Tony, I'm going to give the last word to you. I mean, what's it going to feel like to be back in the pit and the main stage with the orchestra when that moment comes in rehearsals and indeed on opening night?
Well, you know, it's funny that because I've been away now for just a little bit. The feeling that I'm that little bit different in myself, in my development, in my musical trajectory, is that my hope is that I can bring something new to it and have the same energy that I did, you know, during my 22 years here. You know, it would be terrible if I came back and, you know, I'm doing Die Walküre and it's, I'm doing a sort of a pale version of what I did before, and I don't have the same energy. That would be just devastating. But I do have the energy, and I have the curiosity about this production, and the pride, that I'm working in such a great opera house and with a great director and on an enormous and important piece of music. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to, I'm a worrier, but I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, so are we, I think it's fair to say. Tony and Barrie, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us during your rehearsal schedule. Very best wishes for Curtain Up. That is it for tonight's Insight, I'm afraid. But you can, of course, buy tickets to come and see Barrie Kosky's new production of Die Walküre on the main stage here at the Royal Opera House from the 1st of May, conducted by Antonio Pappano, of course. And also you can go and see it live in cinemas on the 14th of May. In the meantime, thanks to everyone watching this around the world, and thank you to everyone here in the Limbury Theatre at the Royal Opera for joining us for this Insight supported by Rolex. Good night.